Happy Easter, everyone. My name is Katy Anderson. I am standing outside in Beaver Lodge by the giant beaver for one simple reason, because I am taking you guys on an Easter egg hunt through this video. So, if you don't watch all of it, you don't get all your eggs. But I do want to just say a quick note on the eggs. I was extremely careful in how I packaged them, just in light of COVID and everything. All the candy's pre-packaged, it's not just open candy. I wore gloves when I packaged it, and I let it sit in the house for a couple days, and the candy's fine. Has no signs of COVID. Oren and I are fine. So I went ahead with it. Everything has been done extremely carefully to make sure that this is a fun, safe thing for you and the kids. So what I'm going to do is at each of these locations is I'm just going to say a little bit about the Easter story, and then also let you know where I am so that you can get the Easter eggs. The first little bit of the Easter story that I really felt like I wanted to start with was the triumphal entry. You can find it in Mark and Luke. I'm just kind of halfway through, which might not make a lot of sense, but to me, with the Easter story, the triumphal entry is almost like the beginning of the end. Jesus had already been doing his ministry. He had already been doing all these many signs of wonders, and people had confirmed, oh, this is the Messiah. Some people were like, I still don't know, like, it'd be great, but I thought he was going to come be this mighty warrior. And then there were people that were just like, who does he think he is? And so there were these three kind of different camps. And so kind of halfway through Jesus' ministry, he told his disciples, he was like, hey, I need you to go grab a donkey from this man. If anyone asks you, just tell him the Lord needs it. Which, if you're the owner of that donkey and you're like, the Lord needs it, it sounds a little crazy. But the disciples go and do just that and say just that. And they return to Jesus with this donkey. And people are like, what are you doing? Like, it's for Jesus. It's for our Lord. He's come. He's here. And people start taking off their coats and their jackets and their ponchos and laying them on the ground so that Jesus, just this normal looking man, can walk through the town. And his disciples are yelling like, Jesus is here. This is our King. Yay! And it's just this massive celebration. And as this entry is going on, some of the Pharisees are like, hey man, tell your disciples to cool it. What they're doing is completely, it's terrible. It's a number one sin. And Jesus is like, no. Like, I tell you, if these were silent, the very stones would cry out. So that no matter, even if men were silent, the very earth would proclaim who God is. And I just think that's an amazing way to start off the Easter story, with just this complete, just boldness, but at the same time humbleness. And I think if those two words best kind of describe Jesus, there's so many words, but his ministry, bold and humble all at the same time. So I am at our second location. Our second location is at the Beaver Lodge campground. There are eggs somewhere in here. Good luck. So after the triumphal entry, that was kind of game on, where Jesus just kept doing whatever he felt God was telling him to do, and he just kept healing and prophesying and doing miracles and raising people from the dead. Like, all these amazing things, and teaching people about right and wrong. And so while he was doing this and doing these miraculous signs and wonders, the Pharisees and the religious people of that day that were tasked with that kind of thing, essentially, all of a sudden were like, we can't have this. This is different than what we've been saying. We're not in charge anymore. We're not okay. And so when that all kind of, after the triumphal entry, when that kind of happened, the Pharisees were like, this is the end. This has got to stop. How do we stop it? So they kept trying to capture Jesus through questions and through philosophy and through conversations, hoping to trip him up. Like, there's got to be some kind of flaw here. But they were not able to do it. They couldn't do it. And so they did something really sneaky. And they went to one of Jesus' closest friends, one of his disciples, and they said, hey, Judas, if we pay you in silver, would you give Jesus over to us? And then we'll put him on trial and we'll crucify him and all these things. But all Judas heard was silver. And so he was like, yeah, I can do that for money. I'm poor. I'm a disciple. I gave everything up to do this. I have nothing. So yeah, this would be great. I need this money. And so just only thinking of money, not thinking about the grander scheme of things, Judas decided to betray Jesus. And so one night, Jesus gathered them all together for Passover, which kind of now in the church we celebrate as communion, which is the bread and the wine that you see up at the front of the church. And so this is the first time that Jesus had done anything like this with the disciples. And so Jesus looked at them and he said, hey, this bread is my body and this wine is my blood. Drink and eat of it in remembrance of me. And so I'm sure that when the disciples were there and they were hearing all of this, I would imagine they were probably a little weirded out, but also being like, yes, Jesus, okay. Because they'd been on such a long journey. They'd been through so many different things. They had seen so many different things. And their love for Jesus grew to something that they didn't understand. And so when he said this, it brought in this serious tone, something that Jesus had been telling them since the beginning, that he was going to die. And so it was just once again, just saying, hey, this is temporary. I'm not here forever. But while on this Passover, Judas is also there. And so when they're eating their meal, it comes out that Jesus knows that Judas is going to betray him. And Jesus looks him in the eye and he's like, go do what you need to do. And Judas he goes. So our third and final location is the place we all miss. It's our church, Beaver Lodge Lions Church, a place where I have been thinking about you youth constantly and been praying for you guys because I miss you. So as a little present, here's your last stop to find some Easter eggs with candy. So just as a disclaimer, there are no eggs inside the church. I just got really cold, so I came inside to finish up the Easter story. And so Judas left Passover to go get his 30 pieces of silver and to go collect the Pharisees so they could come get Jesus. In that time, Jesus and his disciples went to the Mount of Olives, which was a totally normal place for them to go pray. But this time the air was a bit different. And so Jesus left the disciples in one part, and he went a bit further, and he prayed to God so hard. He prays like, Jesus, anything else. Just take this away from me. I don't want to do this. And so Jesus sent an angel to comfort him, but Jesus was so stressed and so overwhelmed by the task that was in front of him that he was sweating drops of blood. He was just so overwhelmed by the enormity of what was coming, but yet looked at Jesus, looked at God all the same time and said, I will do it. I will do this. And so in this time of prayer, Jesus comes back down from where he was and sees the disciples are asleep, and he says, hey, basically it's showtime. And so then off in the distance they could see this crowd of people coming towards them. And Judas goes and kisses Jesus on the cheek and says, this is the one. And so they arrest Jesus, and the disciples freak out and they attack, and Peter cuts off a guy's ear, and then Jesus heals the ear. But even still, they still arrest Jesus. And they take him off and they beat him and they mock him and they blaspheme him. And then they take him before Pontius Pilate. And they're like, Jesus, this man Jesus, like Pilate, he's ruining everything. He's causing dissension. He's ruining your city. And Pilate looks at him and he's just like, I don't want anything to do with this. Pilate had gotten a letter from his wife that said, this man Jesus, do nothing. So Pilate just kind of backed off from the situation. He's like, you know what? Take him to Herod. I don't want any part of this. And so they took him to Herod. And they did the same thing, and Jesus remained silent. Jesus did nothing to defend himself. He just stood there quietly as people hit him, punched him, beat him, kicked him, laughed at him, mocked him. And Herod, seeing this thing just blow up before his very eyes, just from a political standpoint was just like, hey, we gotta like tone this situation down or it's gonna get way out of hand. So what was customary was to bring another prisoner out and do an exchange. Like, if you really want this man in prison, then we'll free this man. And so they brought out this man named Barabbas, who was a murderer, who deserved to be in jail and all of these things. And Herod was like, okay, do you want Barabbas or do you want Jesus to go free? And the crowd chanted, Barabbas, Barabbas, Barabbas. And so Barabbas went free and they took Jesus. And in that time, they did unspeakable horrors. They tortured him. They whipped him from an inch within his life. And then they made a crown of thorns and they mashed it onto his head. And that wasn't where it ended. They put a cross on his shoulders and said, hey, we're going to go all the way to this mountain and you're going to carry it the entire way. Through the town of jeering, mocking crowds, bloodied and battered, you're going to carry this cross. And so he carried the cross all the way to the hill where they were going to crucify him. And they did, and they nailed his feet, and they nailed his hands to that cross. And on top, they nailed a plaque that said, King of the Jews. And they raised that cross up to let Jesus hang there to die. But he wasn't the only one hung there. On both sides of him were two thieves that were also being crucified for their crimes. And one on the other side mocked and jeered right along with the crowd, while the other one looked at him and said, like, you really are the Messiah. And Jesus was like, peace, like, you are forgiven. And just like that, Jesus just forgave that man because of his simple faith, even on death's door. Even though Jesus was dying, he still was looking out for us. We were still his number one priority. There is nothing in the world that stands between Jesus' love for us, for you and for me, even as he hangs on that cross. Even as people are mocking him and throwing things at him, Jesus is still looking at our hearts and still so deeply desiring that people like us, you and me, would come and follow him. And so the story doesn't end there. Jesus dies, and they wrap him up and they put him in a tomb. And the disciples, everyone is kind of laying low. They don't want to be seen. They don't really want to be known. But also, they've been charged with this task of carrying on Jesus' mission. How do we do that when we are completely terrified? And so, as was customary, some of the women went to go lay herbs and spices around Jesus' body for preserving and just to commemorate his life. And so, but when they get there, the stone in front of this giant tomb is rolled away, this ginormous tomb. And there's two people standing there. And they kind of look normal, but also they're really shiny and really pretty. And so they're like, what is going on? And like, don't you remember? Jesus is alive. Jesus is alive. Go back and tell everyone. So these women drop everything they're doing and they run back to the disciples and they bust up in there and they're like, hey, Jesus is alive. And the disciples are like, I don't really think that's true. But at the same time, there's hope. Oh my gosh, Jesus is alive. He's not dead. He's alive. And so now the disciples get up and they sprint to the tomb. And it's exactly like the women said. It's empty. Jesus is not there. Jesus has risen from the dead. And then Jesus appears at the place they're staying. And they're afraid. And they're also excited. And they don't know what to do. And so one says, how do we know it's really you? And Jesus shows them the scars on his hands and feet where the nails went through. And he says, but I'm not staying. You have now been charged with what I have been doing. This is now your mission. You are now going to go out, and in my name, you're going to perform signs and miracles and healings and do all of these teachings to carry on this mission. And so the disciples are like, Jesus, there's no way we can do that. And basically, Jesus is like, you are capable of doing everything I did, which is such a powerful, huge statement. But also it gives us so much hope and confidence in who we are in Christ. Jesus died and rose again not just to say, hey, look what I can do, but for you and for me. Jesus has never cared about anything more than you and I. His love for us surpasses all understanding. And that is the beauty of the Easter story, is that Jesus came to earth for the sole purpose of dying for us and for giving us all of these wondrous signs and miracles that we now have the power to do in his name. And it's just so incredibly amazing. And in this time of weirdness and confusion, I just want to leave you with that message of hope and power, that you have that hope and power in Jesus, and that you are so deeply loved and treasured by the Father. And I am spending all this time praying and just hoping that this Easter can still be something special for you, because that message of hope and power isn't lessened just because you're at home. It is the exact same level of power and hope. I love you guys. Have a happy Easter.